Já vamos imediatamente para o nosso próximo painel. Gostaria de convidar o Dr. Rissa, por gentileza, professor Rissa. Doutora Denise continua na moderator, por favor. E o Dr. Rissa vai alinhar aqui a inteligência artificial na auditoria, na investigação da inteligência artificial na auditoria.
Please welcome Dr. Hussein Issa of Rutgers University. He's a dear friend and colleague of mine. He's partially responsible for why I got into this field, and I'm very delighted that he's coming again today to present to us his research on artificial intelligence in auditing and accounting. Dr. Issa?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today and not basically leaving us right after lunch, which happens sometimes. First of all, I'm going to try and make it as short as possible.
Okay.
So today, those are the points that I'm going to go over. Okay.
That's short.
Just kidding. Okay. Don't worry. See, of all those, this is what we're gonna talk about. And even those, I'm going to make them short. So in return, you have to be nice and not ask me difficult questions. Okay? Do we have a deal? So let's start. First thing, what do we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence, this is not a new concept. It has been around for years and years. So the problem with that, originally, people had high expectations. When computerization started, certain people started to predict that the machines one day will be able to think basically like humans, more or less. This is one of the reasons why Turing test actually exists, to see if a machine can pass for humans. Now, how do you define artificial intelligence? This is when a machine can actually analyze the data that's around it and makes the decision on its own without human intervention. This is what it boils down to talking about. When you talk about artificial intelligence, it includes machine learning, expert systems, etc. Now, those have been around for a while now. The problem is that like 20, 30 years ago, there was a hype with artificial intelligence, and then people were disappointed in the performance of those artificial intelligence systems that were around. Probably at that time, we did not have the right technology, or the technology that would enable us to use it in an efficient and effective way. Now, luckily, we have a better technology. We have a lot more data. Most of it is in digital format, right? So in order for us to be able to analyze something with the computer, if you give it a paper or if you do something like that, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of time. And if you just give them like a paper, they have to convert it to a digital format, right? So if you have manual processes, they have to be digitized in a way in order for a machine to be able to analyze them. That's basically the idea. Luckily, the cost of computational power, the cost of storage has gone down tremendously. Now it's very cheap to actually generate, collect, and store that data. And more importantly, to run analysis such as like deep neural networks, which computationally they require a lot of power. Cluster analysis is the same thing. Now this can be done. I'm going to talk quickly about this technological process reframing. The idea here is basically to reorganize, or it's like reimagineering audit 4.0. This is where you actually change the processes of the way they used to be to the way they can be. So for example, if you look at documents, again, we go back to documents, papers. Rather than looking at it as a paper, you can use PDF. That's the next step, right? This is even before getting to the point where you use tagged data or machine readable data like XBRL. Here, you're talking about scanning the data, the document. The next step would be using OCR to actually turn it into readable format. Not machine readable in the sense that it's tagged, but at least computers can handle this kind of text. Things that later on, someone like Kevin, with his experience in text mining, can actually use to run analysis and identify these things. So now we have more and more companies who are actually using certain kind of OCR to analyze their contracts. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. You have, for example, electronic records. You have more and more ERP systems deployed, right? With those, you have also event logs for controls. Rather than doing test of controls at specific period of time, you can use process mining. Miklos already mentioned, talked about process mining earlier, and you can analyze it on a more continuous basis. At the same time, you can run it on the full population. These are things that are advantageous for us. There's also blockchain, which Andrea will talk about later on. So I'm not going to talk about these. But all these things, you can see that they would require some changes. You cannot just like, this is not an update. Think about it also like an update versus upgrade. If you have an iPhone 6 and you upgrade to an iPhone 7, this is an upgrade. If you have an iPhone 6 running iOS 9 and you update it to iOS 10 or 9.3 or something like that, this is an update only. So it's kind of different. Sometimes you have to make a little bit more efforts to do that. We talked also about what types of data that is being collected. You have now sensor data, for example. You have more social media. More and more companies are actually using social media. They are using exogenous data. Maria Elena was mentioning earlier that, for example, like 80, you said 80 or 90%? 80%, right? 80% of the information is being extracted from exogenous data and not from accounting information. Mm-hmm. This is where the danger kind of lies. We are falling behind. Auditing is falling behind the businesses. Mm-hmm. So Miklos' Imagineering Audit 4.0, when he talked about it, this was borrowed from the Industry 4.0. So we are basically behind. We're trying to catch up with them. We're not doing a good job at that. So this is where we have to actually pick up the pace and do a better job. Now, you have things like, for example, the Internet of Things. You have all these sensors data. We had a study at RUTGERS, one of our former students, Kyung-Gi Yoon, she actually used weather data. You know how weather is? She used the weather data as a predictive of sales revenues for a big chain stores. Now, this information has not been used in the past. This kind of data is not being in use. So this brings in also additional problems or challenges. I'm not going to say problems, challenges, which is basically related to the quality of those data and like the sources and the provenance of the data. Where is this data coming from? Is it coming from Facebook? Or is it coming, for example, from sensors that are automated? Those are computers that extract the data. So you have all these when we talk about big data, all kinds of things come to mind with whether it was structure, quality, where it came from, the reliability of this data. So all this will need to be kind of thought thoroughly before we actually start using them. However, there is some technologies that allow. I think we had a presentation. I remember a presentation a year ago, like 2 years ago. Someone was talking about the catching fraud using video feeds, video recognition. Apparently, the store was capturing the video of the sales, and then there was like more returns than they actually had. Than they actually had, like more returns reported. And apparently, they used the video feeds. Probably someone had to do that manually. Now, Google has the capability, for example, of analyzing the videos themselves, right? They are much more advanced than us in that they have more. I'm not talking about it from a statistical perspective or from the actual conceptual models, but from resources. They have a lot more resources than we do. So, for example, you can use video feeds from drones, using drones to actually look at the parking lot and count how many cars have entered in this area. This is not difficult, right? You can even use not even drones, you can use just security cams. And then you can use that information to see how many, let's say, cars entered. And if, for example, if you have 10 cars and then you report that you sold, for example, 200 clients, then how? How did this happen? Did they all walk to your store, there's something fishy about this. And I apologize for going so fast. My apologies. Now, so for example, when we talk about artificial intelligence, with the power that it brings to the analysis and to analyzing data, there are certain things that will have impact. So this will have an impact on auditing. How? So for example, there are certain things that become possible and certain things that become obsolete. When you think about obsolete things, what's the first thing you think about? Sampling. If I can run analysis on the full population, why on earth would I analyze a sample? If I have 10 million records and I can analyze the 10 million records, why would I take a sample of 100?
You're going to be very popular at the PCOB.
Yeah, this is why I'm not going there. Or I would go there with Denise. They will be afraid of me. Yes.
We'll defend you.
Yes, I would have to. It's worse than when I post the grades to my classes. So you have also, like, for example, there are other things that will be challenged. Like, for example, auditor independence. Now, I think there was also a question earlier today about auditor independence. This is a normal thing. If the company is, they, for example, implement their internal audit department, for example, or the management, they implement some continuous control monitoring system. Now, external auditors would have two choices. Either ignore that system and as a result fall behind, or rely on that system and as a result compromise a little bit of their independence. We go back to the idea of the auditors becoming more of consultants than basically this idea between separation between external auditors and internal auditors will kind of be a little bit murkier. You have also things that will be enabled, like, for example, sensor utilization of exogenous data, such as sensor data, speech, videos, etc. Again, something that will affect us as accounting academics is training and the accounting education. Right now, we have issues with our students in that they are still being trained in the same way that they have been 30 years ago, whereas the world has changed a lot. We still don't teach them data analytics on the undergrad level. And this is not just one school. It's not Rutgers. It's not USP. It's basically, this is in general. The accounting curriculum still does not take full advantage of data analytics. So these are things that will change in the future. Accounting professionals, auditors, they will need to become more and I think there was also a presentation earlier. It was you, Alexander, right? You mentioned like the skills that are required. Those are from basically based on the AICPA. So you need to have more and more IT. You need to understand how to program. You need to understand, not necessarily become like a developer, but at least to understand how to use those tools like ACL and IDEA and how to use R and how to run statistical analysis rather than just take a sample and run descriptive analytics. So you have to be a little bit more, the skills will have to be more advanced in that domain. This slide here, when we talk about audit as a production line, some people get scared because this is more or less automation, right? We're talking here about automation of the audits. Now, we're not saying that this is an automation where the whole thing will be automated. The slide that Maria Elena put earlier with a skinnier robotic version of Miklos, no, neither of you have had hair. You have more hair, actually. It's slightly more hair, so you win on that side. Plus, you win that you're smarter. Yes. So this was actually, it is true in a way, but up to a certain extent, right? This is not going to take away our jobs. And we'll talk, in a few seconds, we'll talk about this. But when you think about it, certain tasks in auditing are easily automatable. We have others where judgment requires more and more work. This will eventually probably come in one way or another, but not in the same way as, like, for example, examining a contract. Examining a contract can scan it and just like basically cross-verify it or cross-check with a template that you have. So basically, there are certain challenges when you think about adding or improving audit using audit 4.0, the concept of billing by the hour will change. Now, more and more companies are moving towards more of basically pricing, like a comprehensive pricing model. However, this will still needs to be changed. Why? Because if you are using one person to run very strong analysis, and yet that person is actually providing a higher assurance level than the traditional auditing, should they be paid less? If they are going to be paid less, there's no way that this will happen. I mean, accounting firms, after all, they're not for profit. They are not doing that pro bono. They want to make money. That's normal. They're not going to do that for free. So there will need to be some kind of change to the way audit fees are decided. Maybe like more expensive, because now the auditors also require more skills. So they will become like more specialized, something like that. There's also the standards. We go back to the standards. Miklos talked about that, and so I'm not going to talk about this. This is because auditing is a standard-driven profession, so the standards will have to encourage the use of data analytics, but like really encourage it. Like, for example, having safe harbors, giving some kind of substitutions. If you do this, you won't have to do that. Whereas if you do this, you will have to do this. In addition to that, you will have to still do this old work. No one's gonna do it. It's like asking my students to do some extra homework. If they do it correctly, they don't get extra points. If they do it incorrectly, they lose points. If they don't do it, they don't lose points. Then why on earth would they do it? And this is the case right now with auditing. The standards do not prevent the companies from running data analytics. But if they find something that they did not find before, they are still liable. And this is one thing. And if they do find something, if they do find something, if they don't do anything, they are fine. The PCAOB is okay with that. So why would they do that? I mean, let's be honest. Now, if you look at it, this is the formalization of audit steps. So basically, this is a generic process, the steps that are followed in audits, right? So when you think about it, and here we're going to, so I'm going to use some magic and split it into two. Okay. See? Now I'm good. I went to Hogwarts in addition to Rutgers. So now, this is just a comparison, and for the sake of time, I'm going to go very quickly over that. Now, you can see here a comparison between a traditional audit, that's on the right side, and you have in the middle, which is AI enabled. So what's the difference between the two? So for example, when you think about pre-planning, you're always thinking about information gathering regarding the client, etc., and looking at the industry and the structure of the company and things like that. Artificial intelligence can add to that, looking at, rather than just like a person looking at some very limited information, because there's also limitations as to how much you can examine. You can run, for example, text analytics, and you can run, Kevin, for example, he runs sentiment analysis on a lot of different pieces of information. You can use that information to provide you with a better estimation of the risk associated with that client. Now, if the company decides to actually go ahead with the client, they can actually, currently they actually start drawing the contract based on a certain template most of the time, right? And then they have the engagement letter, both parties, they sign it. Artificial intelligence can actually automate this step. They can use the information gathered in the first phase to draw a contract, compare the contract to a database of contracts, some digital contracts or smart contracts that can be used later on to fine-tune and customize each contract to every specific client. They can actually come up with a better estimation of the audit fees that are to be paid, etc., etc. Both parties can sign it. You want to take it a step further, you can have it signed digitally rather than using papers and cutting trees. I'm not a big fan of printing, just to say that. Now, the third step would be when they actually start doing internal controls, when they start looking and examining internal controls. Here, if you use the traditional way used to be like, for example, looking at flowcharts, narratives, walkthroughs, etc., to understand how the organization works, how the company works. They look at, for example, they aggregate information related to internal controls. They're trying to assess risk, right? What they do instead of having a walkthrough, why not automate it using, for example, a drone, right?
Right.
We go back to Denise's drones.
That's later today.
That's later today.
Show.
So I'm gonna skip that part with the drones and leave it to Denise. You can, for example, rather than just doing some manual work or, for example, thinking about it, we have, as humans, let's admit it, we have one of the most challenging things is identifying patterns. We are not good at identifying patterns. Let's face it. If I give you a table, it's very difficult to find a pattern. Now, what Miklos mentioned also earlier with regards to the radar, one of the radar projects is visualization. Use visualization here, artificial intelligence, run it so that you can have better understanding. You can see patterns that would direct you, that can help you in directing the audit in a way that would improve audit efficiency and effectiveness. Now, we move on to control risk assessment. Again, the traditional audits, they would do like a test of controls, right? This is a snapshot in time. This is not, so for example, on a certain day, the controls were configured well and they were efficient and effective, right? What about 2 months earlier? Who can guarantee that they were also running and they were effectively running? Can anyone guarantee that? You can't with traditional auditing. With traditional auditing, someone can, most controls are configurable. Someone can reconfigure them right before the arrival of the auditors. If you run something like continuous control monitoring, if you run like process mining, and this is becoming, again, possible because of the additional electronization of data. So if you run process mining, you can see something that happened 6 months ago, and no one can hide it. This is, again, an advantage of using artificial intelligence. You can use, like for example, you can use, if you have, for example, controls, you can use them, again, you identify violations of those controls. And then you can come up with a way to prioritize them based on like some kind of suspicion score. You rank them in order of suspicion. Then you identify the actual problematic cases rather than going towards, this is like the same as like MADs or exceptional exceptions, where you actually, rather than saying that, okay, those are too many, I can't handle them, you need to come up with a way, or artificial intelligence can help you come up with a way to address that issue and to come up with some kind of a ranking of those flagged cases. Now, after that, you have substantive tests. With substantive tests, okay, so again, rather than taking a sample, we go back to sampling. We don't like sampling. We're not going to do sampling. Artificial intelligence allows us to avoid that ugly step. So we actually run it on the full population. You analyze that data. You can find all different patterns, all different exceptions. Then instead of just taking a sample one time, periodically, you can run it on a more continuous basis, and you can run it on the full population. And this is not futuristic. This is actually happening now. There are companies who do that. We know a company, for example, that actually their financial services, they run it on a daily basis. They identify exceptions, they flag them, send them to the business owner and to their auditor. And the business owner would have like a couple of days to fix it. As long as they have not fixed it, it will keep showing up as alert. A week later, if it's not fixed, the auditor will intervene. I would ask them, why haven't you fixed that? So they have the capability of doing that, of fixing those errors before closing the books. That makes more sense. It's not like waiting for something to happen, catching it 6 months later or more, but at least like 6 months later, and by that time it's too late. Instead, you catch it on a daily basis, and if within a week it's not solved, you catch the fraudster, for example, if it's a fraudster, or if someone is not running it efficiently, you fix that. Evaluation of evidence, this will be combined with the previous step. Why is that? Because this is where you actually, before running an analysis, you need to look at the quality of the data. This is the continuous data assurance. It's another component of the continuous audit. So you look at the controls, but you also need to look at the quality of the data that you're analyzing so that you make sure that if whatever you're analyzing is actually of good quality. This is especially important for exogenous data. You need to know where it's coming from. Because I know that auditors, for example, they like to use exogenous data because it's not under the authority or under the control of the company. So it's kind of, in a sense, it's more reliable as to, like management cannot manipulate it. So if the management is trying to commit fraud, they cannot also commit fraud on Twitter feeds. This is not possible. The last one is the audit report. This is a difficult step. Why? Because at this point, auditors, they have to aggregate all this information. This is not an easy task. As human, again, we have problems aggregating information coming from different pieces, from different sources. Artificial intelligence can help us do that in a more automated way. Moreover, and more importantly, it would allow us to have a more continuous scoring system. Rather than having clean opinion, qualified opinion, you can actually give them scores because not all clean opinions are the same. When you look at internal control systems, you say, okay, you have good internal control systems, or is it good or not good, right? Do you give it a grade? We don't give it a grade. So this is something that can actually help us provide a more continuous grading system. That would actually tell you how good you're doing or how bad you're doing. Now, we get to the point where, are we going to be replaced or supplemented? Is artificial intelligence going to be, is it going to be, this is basically the last slide. So is it going to be a replacement of our auditors, or is it of the auditors or accountants, or is it going to be a supplement? Now, we can think about it in two ways. You can think about it, for example, like think about any technology. This is true for most, basically, practically any technology, like navigation. Navigation could be an assistant, like a GPS. All of us, we use GPS, right? We stopped using maps, except if it had Google or Apple Maps before it, right? So either Google Maps or Apple Maps that you're using. You're not actually using maps. So a GPS would help you. A driverless or autonomous car will replace you. Think about it in the same way. You have ATM machines. So ATM machines, they have replaced tellers. You have other technology that can help, like for example, calculators, they helped, or computers, they helped tellers become more efficient. And then ATM machines, they gain more sophistication and they replace tellers. Now you can deposit checks, you can withdraw money, you can do all kinds of transactions either online, using your phone, or using an ATM machine. Think about it as also cashiers. You have more and more stores that are moving towards having a more automated things like checkouts, like self-checkout, or Amazon Go. You don't even need someone like that. You don't even need a machine. You just like put it in your basket and it charges you. So this will replace the cashier. However, the register was helpful. So the register is something that was used to assist the cashier. Amazon Go is replacing that. Now, do we think that we are going to be replaced or supplemented by that? Certain tasks will be definitely replaced. We all have seen like TurboTax, right? H&R blocks. They have replaced a lot of tax preparation CPAs. So CPAs whose main role was to prepare taxes. A lot of people now, they use the software to do that. This is taken from a study where they actually analyzed over 700 professions and to see which one is actually is at risk of being replaced. or computerized, right? You see, we're not doing well. The way we are doing work now. Yeah, I don't want to show. I will show that after I get tenure. I'm not showing that now. So this is why we're trying to work as hard as possible to get tenure before this changes. The thing is, most of the work that we're doing now can be replaced because we are doing some manual processing, some stuff that do not require our mental capabilities, our real skills as auditors. So your judgment, the professional judgment. You spend most of your time preparing the data and looking for the evidence and taking samples, etc., and very little time spent on actually analyzing the analysis. This is where artificial intelligence can help us supplement this. This is a more comprehensive list. This is the same list that put before. This is just for you later on. We covered part of them again. And any questions? See, good. We had a deal that they were not going to ask questions. No, plus we had a deal. So thank you so much.
If you have a question, please ask him.
Uma salva de palmas ao Dr. Rissa.